Welcome, Altered community. We're here tonight with a special non-gameplay news video. If you haven't heard, Equinox announced this morning that they've decided to initiate or enact, however you want to say it, the first errata in the game for the card Robin Hood. So the plan is to go through this article, kind of discuss what they say and our opinion on it, and sort of just, yeah, we're just going to discuss the change, how I personally feel about it, how I think the community at large feels about it, what it does to the game, like the precedent it sets and things like that. Let's go ahead and start going through this article. I don't know if we're going to read the whole thing word for word. We're going to try to read most of it because there is good insight here, and there's a lot of quotes from designers and things like that that explain kind of the process overall for making the card and like what happened after the game came out. So, addressing Robin Hood's gameplay experience. This came out November 14th. It was out when I woke up this morning. Reading time 6 minutes. In case you want to go ahead and read it yourself. We've just passed the 2-month mark since the official launch of Altered, and we at Equinox have been overwhelmed with the way the community has embraced the game. Altered players from all backgrounds, both seasoned TCG veterans and new to TCG players alike, have been exploring the tumult in many different ways, relentlessly building decks, trading cards, and organizing grassroots Altered tournaments, and of course searching for that perfect unique card. Within this time frame, we've been listening to the discussions about gameplay experience in as many different communities as we can. As a result of these discussions, along with our analysis, we're making an adjustment we feel will have a positive impact on the Altered experience of many. And we knew this. If you're active in the community, we knew something was coming for Robin Hood. They said as much probably a month ago, maybe more than a month ago. So everyone was just kind of waiting, and no one was positive when it was going to happen, but we knew something was going to happen. Say hi. So, the changes. I can paraphrase a lot of this. Cat, she's being so annoying. So changes. I can paraphrase this part. So basically, at the common rarity, the old version of the card said characters your opponents play cost 1 more. It was just a straight up tax effect for your opponent. And the new effect says characters your opponents play can't cost less than 2. And then in parentheses to like basically explain, if they would cost less, they cost 2 instead. For the rare version, it's the exact same. It just says cards instead of characters. And for the unique version, they get whatever new version matches the unique ability, so character or card, and they just don't get the reminder text to explain exactly how it works. Kind of 2 important things to talk about. If there is a unique that had a double tax effect, it just has this new ability twice, which is redundant. You can't make something cost 2 if it would cost less twice. So things just have redundant abilities now, but there are a lot of uniques with redundant abilities. It's actually not that big of a deal. The thing I'll talk about first is this new ability is mildly more confusing because, and I think that's just like, it could be, that's just true because they felt the need to add reminder text to the common and rare version, which to me says that they also thought it was mildly more confusing. But what this ability actually does in practice is make things that cost 1 cost 2, or if there's cost reducers. So if you have like Bountiful Meadow and you're making something cost less, it will cost 2. So it turns off your Bountiful Meadow for things that cost 2 or less, essentially, or 3 if you're trying to make it cost 1 or something. As far as I know, that's like how that would work. Anyone can correct me in the comments if it doesn't do anything with cost reducers, but if it doesn't do things with cost reducers, the only thing it does is make things that cost 1 cost 2. And we'll discuss like what I think about that in general towards the end. I'm gonna try to save my like full opinion on everything um, for the end of the article, although I will like place it in here and there. So this is effective tomorrow, November 15th. If you're watching this on stream today, I'm going to try to get this YouTube video out today. If you're watching the YouTube video the day it's released, the change has already been implemented in your collection, and it is like being implemented on Board Game Arena like as we speak, if it hasn't been implemented already. In terms of paper play, if you're going to a local event, they do talk about that they know print on demand isn't in service yet, and what they are essentially asking players to do is to be honest with their opponents, and if you play Robin Hood, explain that there was an errata, let your opponent scan the card to confirm how it works now, show an image of the new version of card, just make it very clear that there is a new version that works differently. I personally have a problem with this because I've been in too many situations at game store events where people are disingenuous, and I think as the designer of a game, if you can nullify this from happening, then you should, and it shouldn't be up to your players to be honest about something, because not everyone keeps up with the games they play as much as someone like me who makes content for the game, and I can't expect everyone to know that this happened. Like, hopefully everyone will know within a couple months, but in a couple months, like, a new set will come out. So, in terms of this, I'm not a huge fan of the timing of how this happened, although I do, like, know why it was necessary, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. But if they could have waited for print on demand to be going and then done this and had people the option, like people would have had the option to get the new versions of the cards, or instead of this, I kind of wish they just said, here's 3 images, here's a common image, here's a rare image of the errata card, print these out for your common and rare versions. So at least then it's like in the physical world showing people that the tax ability does not exist anymore. And then if somebody tries to like argue, because this is going to happen, someone's going to make the argument that the uniques didn't change because they're supposed to be unique. And like, you can show them like, no, they literally just like that ability does not exist anymore. I think that this is going to cause more problems than they think it is. These things should be happening at the same time. The digital and the physical game should be changing at the same time, whenever possible. So this is a long section from the game design team talking about kind of like where the problem happened and what went wrong. I will paraphrase it a little bit. I think there's some like key things to point out that kind of shape my opinion. But Robin Hood is Altered's most controversial card so far. We've had a lot of feedback from the community regarding the gameplay experience of playing against Robinhood that led us to make this decision. Robinhood was intended as a thematic design that would tax the rich by making life harder for people that wanted to play a lot of cards in the same day. In practice, however, even players with average costs or expensive cards get punished by Robinhood. I'm unfamiliar. Do you have any big physical TCG erratas? I'm only used to digital ones. Magic the Gathering has errata cards before, but they're typically like a massive pool of cards that are being errated and not a single card. It is kind of hard. I know Grand Archive just errated a card, and I can talk about it at the end, but I think that was a good example of a good errata. If anyone's curious to look it up, Grand Archive errata a card called Three Visits, and it kind of plays into some of the stuff I kind of concerned about with this errata. They go on to talk about that the development of Robinhood was tumultuous and took a long time. They talk about how it originally cost 5 mana and they thought it wasn't good enough. And basically, the last week of development, they made it cost 1 less. And again, I am paraphrasing. Please read this article if you want the like absolute details. This is something that comes up a lot in trading card games, and I wish we didn't have to keep talking about it, but nothing good ever came from changing a card drastically in the last week of a set's design. And I'm going to make the argument that changing the cost of the card is drastic because it changes, like, it lets you play it an entire day early. There were other things that could have been tweaked. They could have tweaked the stats so that it just was like easy to deal with or something. I don't know. Like, there was other things to do. I have thoughts on what I wish they would have done in the end, but I'll save that. But this is something that like I never want to hear, and I know it's natural. It's gonna always happen. And I'm glad they admitted that they made a mistake. But I really wish designers would get into the mindset of we can't change cards the last week of design. The last week of design should be purely for basically like copy editing, just making sure the abilities are read the way they're supposed to be read, and there shouldn't actually be any changes being done because you don't have enough testing time, and you never will. But they do mention this. They do say that we've learned a lot from everything that has happened surrounding this card, particularly surrounding last minute balancing changes. We've since worked hard to implement internal systems to prevent us from repeating these mistakes. This is very good to hear. I would like to know what those changes were to the internal design process to make sure things aren't changed the last week of design, because this has been a known problem in card games since the dawn of time, and it really shouldn't be happening anymore, even at the beginning of a game's life. Like, no designer should have the confidence that they're not going to mess up if they're trying to change things in the final hour. But that's just my opinion. They go on to say that the main reason this is happening to Robinhood is that it's frustrating to play against, especially with the hero Waru and Mac being able to keep Robinhood out for essentially 4 days in a row, just really destroying your opponent's game plan, because taxing every card or every character you play is just like, it's overwhelming. And I agree with this. They also mentioned that some Robinhoods have a double tax ability, which just like we saw in one of the weekly online leagues, just like really exasperates the problem. And they continue kind of talking about it, but I think we can end this part of the article here and just keep moving on. I like that they're acknowledging they made a mistake. Um, Companies should always do that. I don't like the mistake was the same mistake that every card game makes over and over again, and I wish that we were learning the lesson from other card games instead of assuming that everything was going to be fine and we weren't going to make that mistake. Um, I personally think that, like I was saying, the last week of design should have no changes. It should all just be about confirming. And if there is a change, it should never be mana cost. It should never be a complete change to the ability. It should always be like very minor changes. So they go on to talk about how they came up with this erratum, which is they explored banning rare Robin Hood, but they were afraid that the common would just take its spot and it really doesn't solve anything. Banning rare and common Robin Hood, but then they were afraid that players would just seek out more unique Robin Hoods, greatly increasing their price and being equally frustrating to play against. Banning every instance of a card featuring the line of Robin, the text of Robin. So banning every card in the game, including the uniques that had the tax effect. Definitely extreme. Hey Doombringer, hope you're doing well. We're currently recording the news video for the Robin Hood errata. Banning every card that had the tax effect was definitely the most extreme option. Banning or errating Waru. So they believe that this would have left the root issue untouched because Robin Hood strategies would have just been in Golrong and Sigismar. And then the last option that they are mentioning here, although I'm sure there were more, was removing the bureaucrat subtype from Robin Hood, and they did not believe that it solved the issue because there were other unique bureaucrats with the Robin Hood ability that they would have just used in Waru anyway. They say that the option of doing an erratum avoids all the pitfalls of the aforementioned options. We intend to restore Robin Hood's initial identity of taxing players that play a lot of cheap cards. We expect it to be a good card against Trace, Aphanis, or Sigmar decks with low curves, while being easier to play around for other decks. This also ensures that uniques with this ability remain relevant and interesting. We acknowledge that it can be disheartening for Robin enjoyers out there and people who were invested in building the best Waru decks they could, but we believe that player enjoyment and competitive integrity is the most healthy priority for the game. So I'm going to talk a little bit in this section because I did just notice, and we're going to double check that I'm not being crazy. I don't agree with errating Waru having no effect because I think that it still would have made a significant difference if, this is just my opinion, I think Robin Hood's fine if it's not in play for 4 days in a row. Again, just my opinion. This is not actually what I would want to do. Hey Draconis, hope you're doing well. The thing that's kind of bothering me a little bit about this list, and I'm going to scroll up to double check. I got into it. We're in it. Okay. Let me see if I can find. Okay, no, it makes sense. So before we move on, I'm gonna say what I wish they would have done. And I know that this is a hot take, and YouTube, you can come at me in the comments. I don't like that the errata completely changed the wording of the ability, even if the intention they had is the same. So the original intention was to make it so that low-cost things got taxed. So decks couldn't play a bunch of low-cost things on the same day. I personally would have rather them just changed the tax effect to be symmetrical for two reasons. First is logistics and just player confusion. I think if you just changed the ability to say characters players play cost one more instead of like, or player, what, however you word it, characters opponents play cost one more, instead of that you say players, I think it's a lot easier to parse in an errata if less of the card changes. But also I think symmetrical tax effects are way more interesting because the person who's playing the tax effect now has to build their deck in a specific way to not screw themselves over. And it gives an extra element to deck building that the game doesn't currently have. Because if you're a Waru deck and you want to play Robin Hood, and Robin Hood taxes both players, well, suddenly you have to think about, can I play these 5 drops? Do I have to keep a low curve? Like how many, like it's just way more interesting and it's way less confusing of an errata. So personally, I wish that's what they did. I understand why they didn't do that, but that was my wish. But we'll move on. If you want to read the player compensation part, you can. I will mention card value at the end because I have a strong opinion about it. So they go on to talk about altered balancing. I do want to read all of this. The video might be getting a little long, but I do want to read this part because I think it. Yeah, Doombringer, like that wording works too. I will die on the hill that like taxing effects can be fine, and people tend to not care if they're symmetrical as much because it forces you to build your deck in a specific way. And like because of the way the game works, everyone could just play 2 drops instead of 1 drops. Like it's really not that hard to avoid. Um it's what the change actually did was say, people say that like cards that cost 1 are basically pseudo after you effects. It basically said that like you don't get an after you effect for 1. Like a lot of people play 1 drops to be like, I want to do other things, but I'm gonna make you play something first. It basically just turned that off in the end. So I don't know. I think a symmetrical effect is just more interesting. But let's go through these balancing quotes. And so our goal with Altered is to offer a unique deck building experience and to reward players who find creative solutions to challenging puzzles. With this change, we want to take the occasion to give you more insights into the early stages of our approach to game balancing and how we envision it. Fun first. I mean, could have told you that. In game design, our primary goal when creating a card is to bring enjoyment to players. However, the concept of enjoyment or fun is broad and subjective, especially in a collectible card game where the player experience unfolds across multiple layers. There's the immediate enjoyment of playing the card, but also the excitement it generates simply by reading its effects, as with cards like Sakara Brew or Hydrocana. Then there's the fun of crafting a deck around a card. Many players likely remember the thrill of building strategies with the Foundry, Axiom Bastion, or Lyra Festival. And finally, there's the satisfaction of winning, particularly in competitive play. Yeah. I don't know if the particularly in competitive play was really necessary at the end there, but agreed. Like This is a true statement of games in general. Metagame health. While we won't disclose specific numbers, our goal is to ensure diversity and archetypes and factions at all levels of play, from weekly expeditions to the World Championships. We recognize that many players feel a strong connection to a particular faction, so if any faction consistently underperforms, we will investigate and seek solutions. Additionally, we aim to have a variety of decks represented across all factions. This is good. This is the goal of every like semi-competitive card game, right? This is kind of an awkward thing to say because of board game arena and just like events being so public. Everyone already knows what the meta is. Like, it's weird to say they won't disclose specific numbers because, like, even if you added all the store events, the data is probably not going to be that much different. And I'm a proponent of, like, this information should be public because this information will incentivize people to try more things if they see that actually in certain parts of the US, Saudi is doing well. People will try to build Saudi. The problem is when people don't see Saudi in the meta of the public information, they don't try. Like, this information should be public. Reducing splash damage. With its rarity system, Altered creates strong connections between cards. Not only are cards grouped within families, but they are also linked through the generation system of unique cards. An Altered a card's ability can be shared across multiple other card families. As covered earlier within the options we considered for this change, this means that banning or modifying a card can cause ripple effects that extend far beyond the original card, putting new layers of potential balancing challenges we want to avoid whenever possible. This is true. It's just the system that's hard to manage. Um, and I don't know. At this point, like, I don't really know if there will ever be an easy way to manage like the game they created. More data, more tests. Game balancing is a challenging task. While we do our best to prevent any issues before a set goes into production, we also need to monitor each set's impact, both during its time on sale and in the future. As new sets start interacting with older ones, the more sets there are, the harder this task becomes. With the official release, we now have access to a lot more data, your numerous and passionate feedback, tournament results, and last but not least, data from Board Game Arena. The combination of all this information, along with the development and improvement of our internal tools and the growing experience of our playtesting team, shall help us identify and plan future balancing decisions with increasing accuracy. We know this. Like, there's so much data. We've talked about it before. The amount of data this game has so early is a double-edged sword because it's great that Equinox has all this data to help them make decisions, but it's kind of bad that the players also have all this data, which I know kind of contradicts what I just said, that information should be public, but if there's going to be information, it should be public, but it does make it tough. Um, Competitive minding people will abuse the data if they can. So they go on to kind of discuss the key steps to balance. So I'll just read those really quick. We'll talk about our final thoughts. Somehow I didn't mention all my thoughts, and then we'll wrap up this news. So, however, to address things properly, it's essential to follow a few key steps. First, we need to determine whether it's a rules issue or a balancing issue. Okay. Then confirm the problem. This usually involves increasing the number of test games and analyzing the available data. If it's a balancing issue, it's possible that players simply haven't yet discovered a counter strategy, though one may exist. We also need to track community sentiment on the issue. Sometimes unforeseen situations arise, and the community expresses a preference for keeping a card as is rather than fixing it. Another factor to consider is the potential impact of a problem in relation to future sets. A card's impact may be less significant over time as new cards are introduced, or conversely, it may become stronger. Finally, we need to explore solutions and test them, which can take several weeks. On top of this, there's the technical implementation to consider due to the digital nature of our game and its connection to BGA. Modifying thousands of cards carries risk for the database, so any change needs to be carefully tested. So all of this makes perfect sense. This is definitely this section of the article is definitely in reaction to people in general. If something's going to happen, want it to happen as quickly as possible. It's about 2 months since the game released, so this erratum is happening around 2 months after the game released. And this is part of the issue I have with it. We talked about like what I wish they would have done with the ability instead, but that's very personal, and like I get that it's just my opinion. And this is just my opinion too, but I feel more concretely that this is the thing that needs to like be improved. I think that there's a time threshold that you should be errataing a card and not doing something more extreme. And I think 2 months is too late, especially because we can play on Board Game Arena. 2 months when you can play online and there's two online events, now three online events every week, is too much gameplay for an errata to take this long. And I personally think once you get this far, a more extreme measure should be taken. I think the threshold for a game like this for errataing something is like, this is true, Doombringer. So I have two opinions, and they're the exact opposite. I think if you're going to errata something, it either needs to happen very, very quickly, like 2 weeks, and we kind of mentioned an example of this happening, or it should happen after the second set comes out. This like in the exact middle between two sets feels awkward, and I think it's what a lot of the feels bads are coming from, because it's like when you let a card linger long enough to where people think they don't know what's going to happen versus dealing with it as quickly as possible, which like the data's there, the public opinion was there very quickly, or waiting long enough to where the second set comes out. I think that doing it but like in the exact middle between two sets was kind of a mistake. Instead of what they did, I wish instead today they would have said an errata to Robinhood is coming with the release of Trial by Frost. Trial of Frost. I can't remember. Sorry. Within the week of release of the second set, Robinhood will be errataed and give people the warning that they're gonna change the card when the second set comes out. I think if you're gonna wait, you should do that. You should give people the direct warning that we're not banning it, we're gonna errata it when the second set comes out. They did give warnings that they were going to do something, but they were never clear about what they were going to do. And while I think people should have understood that some negative effect was going to happen, I can understand why people were still up in the air saying maybe they won't do anything because they weren't direct enough about it. An example of like errataing something early, what I think errata should actually be used for if they're for a single card. Sayonara asked earlier in the video if I had an example of like a card being errataed in a big TCG. Grand Archive just errataed a card called Three Visits like 2 weeks after the set came out. They errataed it immediately after a tournament. Like They saw the tournament, they acknowledged they made a mistake, and they errated it. That's what an errata is for. If you wait 2 months, even though you're going to acknowledge it was a mistake, it's too long. I'm glad they errated it. They did the right thing by admitting they made a mistake and going through, like, this article is amazing from like a design standpoint to go through their thought process. I just think the timing of it was incredibly awkward, and it should have either been done way quicker, or it should have been acknowledged now and actually implemented with the second set, or when print on demand actually has started. Yeah, sayonara. I hope so. Like, the game is new and they're learning, the players are learning. I just think some things, especially in game design, are so systematic and they happen so often in a genre of games that it should be attempted to avoid them. I'm personally not a fan of erratas. I think that they make games more confusing, even with the print on demand system. Well, the funny thing with Grand Archive is that no one thought the card was OP until it was played, and then it was extremely obvious, and then everyone, even the players, immediately were like, this is OP. And I think the same thing happened with Robin Hood. Like, I know that I defended Robin Hood for a long time, but I think after a couple weeks, everyone knew something was going to happen. Um, so personally, like, when a game is new, I would have preferred them today make an announcement that they were going to errata it, either when print on demand or when the second set came out. I think that that would have been smoother for people. It would have given people a chance to, like, emotionally prepare, which is an understated thing that a developer can do. Uh, but I could talk about the value of the unique Robin Hoods and people being upset, but that's probably a topic for another video. So we'll read the conclusion and we'll wrap up this part of the stream and this video here. This definitely ended up being a little longer than I meant it to be, but that's okay. It's it is the game's first, like, errata. It's the first thing to balance a card that's already been released, so there's definitely a lot to discuss. We know that many of you are truly committed to the game, invested in the search for great uniques and innovative deck building. Our motto will always be to encourage you to try solving the pieces of the puzzle and not discourage you from doing so. Making balance changes is a delicate task. When cards are changed or banned, this can be frustrating to two players who have spent so much time and effort gathering them, while taking no action risks an unhealthy play experience, which could cause even more frustration. Altered is innovating in many areas in the TCG landscape, and because of this, we believe that it's even more important to quickly recognize and act on our mistakes. With this change, we hope to inspire fresh momentum in the current Altered meta, giving underplayed heroes a chance to shine and see you try even more new strategies. All good intentions. The question is going to be, can they follow through? Because there's been plenty of card games that admit their mistakes and then make them over and over again. And of course, I'm not saying they're going to do that, but I think it would be foolish of anyone to expect them to create a perfect game from here on out. Designing a card game is extremely difficult. It's a ton of moving parts. Mistakes are going to be made. And I think if they continue to have this attitude of admitting them and being very transparent about how they came to the mistake and kind of their thought process, I think they're on a good track. Even if I have issues with the very fine details of how this errata was handled. So that's going to be it for the news video for this week, this random special video. I hope everyone's having a good time. I hope you're having a good life. YouTube, feel free to like and subscribe if you want. Leave a comment for what you think about this change to Robinhood. Do you like it? Do you think it was good for the game? Do you think it was bad for the game? What decks do you expect to see improved because of this? And I'll catch you in the next news video whenever that happens. Bye bye.